My name is Avery. I'm 31 years old. The first sound was the hard little click of my heels stopping outside the glass conference room on the 32nd floor. Not because I meant to stop, because my body did it before my brain caught up. I had just stepped off the executive elevator with a Starbucks cup in one hand and my laptop bag digging into my shoulder when I heard my mother's voice drifting down the hallway like she belonged there, like she signed the lease. The air smelled like burnt espresso, printer toner, and that cold, polished steel smell expensive offices always have before 9 in the morning. My brother Nolan was standing beside her in a navy suit, so new the fold lines were still holding at the elbows. He had one of those smug half smiles that only ever showed up when somebody else had already built the thing, and he was preparing to step into the photograph afterward. My father had one hand spread across the back of a leather chair like he was already placing Nolan in it, positioning him, claiming the seat before the room even agreed it was empty. Then my mother said, clear as a fire alarm, "We're here to discuss transitioning her role to her brother. It's what's best for the family." For one strange second, I forgot how to move. Beyond the glass wall, 3 members of my operations team were sitting stiff and confused. Our HR director, Denise, had a yellow legal pad open in front of her, and the expression of a woman who knew she had accidentally walked into the opening scene of a lawsuit. My office was 20 steps away. A corner skyline, brushed brass nameplate, floor-to-ceiling windows I had earned the brutal way, and suddenly none of it felt secure, not because they had power, because they had audacity. I pushed the door open. My mother turned first. Cream wool coat too expensive for April. Pearl earrings. That church fundraiser smile she used whenever she wanted to look gracious while controlling the room. My father lifted his chin at me like I had interrupted him in his own boardroom. Nolan didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. "Good," my mother said. "You're here." I set my coffee on the side credenza with more care than I felt. "Why are you in my conference room?" I asked. Dad answered like this was all procedural. "We didn't want to do this in the lobby." My eyes went straight to Denise. She looked pale. See, Nolan adjusted one cuff. Casual? Smug? Performative? "Relax, Avery," he said. "We're having a family conversation." "No," I said, "you're having a trespassing conversation." Mom gave a tight little laugh. "This is exactly the attitude I told them about. Defensive, territorial, ungrateful." The glass walls made it worse. People passing in the corridor slowed down without wanting to look like they were slowing down. A junior analyst near the printer froze with a stack of quarterly reports in his hands. The city beyond the windows looked hard and silver. Spring light, clean lines. New York doing what New York always does. Acting like it has no patience for weakness while quietly rewarding it in men every day. I kept my face still because I knew my family. If I cracked first, they would call me unstable. If I raised my voice, so they would call me disrespectful. If I stayed quiet, they would treat my silence like consent. "Nolan is not being transitioned into anything," I said, "because this is not a family pizza place. It's a corporate division." Dad slid his hand off the chair. "Don't talk down to your brother." "Then don't bring him to my office like he's here for a coronation." Mom took a breath and turned toward Denise, like she was appealing to neutral authority. "We were explaining that Avery always knew this role was temporary. We appreciate how far she's taken things, of course, but Nolan is finally ready to step into leadership. It makes sense for blood to stay aligned." Denise blinked once. Slowly. I looked at my mother. "Temporary, according to whom?" Her eyes sharpened. "According to the family that got you where you are." There it was. The old poison, just poured into a better glass. I grew up in a house where Nolan's failures were called potential, and my achievements were treated like chores. If he forgot his homework, he was creative. If I got an A-, I was distracted. He got applause for effort. I got reviewed for results. At Thanksgiving, he told loud stories, spilled red wine on my mother's white table runner, and everybody laughed because Nolan was just Nolan. I brought the pie, kept the peace, helped clean up, and got asked why I always seemed tense. At Christmas, he got expensive second chances wrapped in shiny paper. I got advice. When he got fired from his second sales job for lying about his numbers, Dad called it a bad culture fit. When I was 26 and sleeping under my desk to save a failing client portfolio, when Mom told relatives I had a nice office job downtown. Nice. Like I sold scented candles out of a kiosk. Nolan has never worked here, I said. Mom fired back immediately. He has potential. He has a LinkedIn profile and a parking ticket history. Nolan's smile thinned. Cute. Dad planted both hands on the table. Enough. You have forgotten where you come from. Your success has made you arrogant. Families should share opportunity, and you have been selfish with yours. A selfish daughter. That was always the final charge when I refused to let them use me. I looked back at Denise. Who signed them in? She cleared her throat. Reception called up. Your mother said she was here for an executive transition discussion. My stomach tightened. Not from fear, from recognition. Executive transition. That was not language my mother came up with on her own over coffee. Somebody had said that to her, or she had heard it from somebody inside this building and repeated it like she understood more than she did. I turned back to her. Who else have you spoken to? She crossed her arms. People who matter. Dad added, and people who understand business better than you think. It was a stupid sentence. It was also a dangerous one. I walked to the door and held it open. This meeting is over. Nolan laughed under his breath. You can't seriously think you can shut this down. I looked right at him. Watch me. Mom didn't move. You are doing this in front of staff? You started it in front of staff. Dad's voice hardened. We are your parents. That explains your titles, I said. No, not your clearance. Then everything went still. Not movie still, office still. The kind where the HVAC hum suddenly sounds louder, phones ring somewhere far away. Paper stops moving. Everybody in the room knows something just crossed a line, and now they're waiting to see who's going to pretend it didn't. Denise stood. Mr. and Mrs. Wren, I do need to ask you to step out. Mom looked at her like a server had corrected her pronunciation. You're taking instructions from my daughter? Denise gave her the dry, exhausted look of a woman with an HR certification and a mortgage. From policy, Nolan muttered. This place is unbelievable. I answered without looking at him. You haven't seen unbelievable yet. They left badly. Mom with her shoulders back like she was exiting a charity gala she no longer wished to support. A dad with a glare meant to promise consequences. Nolan brushing past me hard enough to clip my arm on purpose, the move of a 12-year-old in a $40,000 suit. When the door shut, Denise sat back down and exhaled. I'm sorry, she said quietly. For what? For the fact that I suspect this isn't the whole problem. That landed harder than anything my parents had said. I picked up my coffee. It had gone lukewarm. The sleeve was damp under my fingers. Outside the room, coworkers scattered with the guilty speed of people who had absolutely been listening. Denise slid a folder toward me. Before you got here, your mother referred to prior conversations. Yes, she implied there had already been discussions with leadership about your succession. There have not been. She also mentioned your role being structured around family continuity. I stared at her. This is a logistics and strategy division for a private growth firm, I said, not a monarchy. I know. The folder held 2 printed email chains. I recognized neither. The receptionist had forwarded them to HR after my mother's performance downstairs. One was from a generic Gmail address signed with my father's full name. The other was from Nolan, copying 3 people in our vendor network and signing himself as incoming transition liaison. My hands went cold. The first email claimed my position as Executive Vice President of Strategic Recovery had always been held on a provisional basis pending transfer to the family's preferred long-term successor. The family's preferred long-term successor. I read that line 3 times. Slowly, carefully. Like maybe it would become less insane on the 4th pass. It didn't. My parents had not shown up on impulse. This was not a tantrum. They had been saying this elsewhere, to people, in writing. Who received these? I asked. Denise named 2 vendor reps and a junior member of our internal finance team. Then she added carefully, and there may be more. I looked up. Maybe? Our legal department got an inquiry yesterday about authorization signatures on one of the Phoenix recovery accounts. Every muscle in my back went tight. Phoenix was not just any account. Phoenix was the account that saved our division a year and a half earlier after a software migration failure turned half our reporting structure into smoke and panic for 6 straight weeks. I rebuilt that pipeline with 4 engineers, 2 sleepless weekends, a trash can full of energy drink cans, and 1 panic attack in the women's restroom I covered with concealer and a fresh blouse 20 minutes later. Who contacted legal? I asked. They haven't told me yet. I stood. Tell them I'm on my way. Denise nodded. Avery. I stopped at the door. This is bigger than family embarrassment. I know, I said. What I didn't say was that embarrassment had never scared me as much as pattern recognition. And I knew this pattern. Nolan failed. My parents adjusted reality around him. And then they demanded everyone else cooperate with the version that protected him and cost me. In college, he crashed my car, and my mother asked why I had left the insurance card somewhere confusing. At 24, he borrowed $5,000 from my savings, and Mom called it keeping money in the family until I forced him to repay half. When he told extended family my first promotion happened because Dad knew a guy, everybody chuckled like he was joking. He had been sanding down my work for years. Only now he had done it in a building where everything had timestamps. I crossed the executive floor, passed my office without going in, and headed straight for legal. My reflection flashed in the glass as I moved. Dark blazer, white silk shell, hair pinned low, face composed. Ma, you would have thought I was walking into a quarterly review instead of the autopsy of my family's latest stunt. Legal sat 2 floors below us. Colder lighting, less art, more caution. Marta Singh, our deputy general counsel, met me outside her office holding a printout and wearing the expression of a woman trying not to scare me before she had the facts. She once told me every interesting legal problem begins with someone saying, "This might be nothing." "This is not nothing," she said before I even sat down. "Good," I answered. "I'm not in the mood for a soft landing." She handed me 3 pages. Yesterday afternoon, someone contacted contracts claiming to represent an executive transition on North River and Phoenix. They asked whether approval rights tied to those accounts would automatically transfer upon role reassignment. Someone? She tapped the name. Nolan Wren. He had used his real name. That was almost insulting. My pulse kicked hard behind my eyes. And contracts told him what exactly? Nothing useful. The wording was strange, so they kicked it up to us. Did he mention me? Marta looked at the paper again. He referred to you as the current female lead, as if your name wasn't necessary. Of course he did. In my family, I was always a position before I was a person. Marta leaned back. There's another issue. There always is. She turned her monitor toward me. A forwarded email chain from Ethan Cole, one of our board observers. 70. Old money calm, rarely involved in day-to-day noise. My father had emailed him 2 weeks earlier. I did not know my father even had his address. The message was polished in that fake corporate tone men use when they think vocabulary can compensate for legitimacy. He claimed our family had long contemplated an orderly transition of internal leadership duties from daughter to son. He described me as temperamentally gifted, but increasingly resistant to collaborative family strategy. He implied Nolan had informal alignment behind the scenes. My father had emailed a board observer about transitioning me out of my own job. I laughed once. A short, ugly sound. Marta stayed still. Did your father have any reason, she asked, to believe he could make those representations? No. Any ownership link? Informal advisory role? A legacy authority? No. Any relationship with Robert Hale we don't know about? That made me pause. Because technically, yes. Just not the relationship my father imagined. He knows Robert socially, I said. Or thinks he does. They served together on a nonprofit fundraising board years ago. Marta's brows lifted slightly. The founder never mentioned that. Because in Robert's universe, attending the same hospital gala is not the same thing as trust. She nodded. I'm asking because these messages suggest confidence. Manufactured confidence, maybe, but confidence. That word stayed with me. Confidence. Borrowed confidence had always been Nolan's favorite outfit. Borrowed money, borrowed polish, borrowed certainty, borrowed rooms, borrowed introductions, but this felt bigger. But this? He was asking about approval rights on accounts he should not even know were structured that way. Who told him to ask about Phoenix and North River? I said. We're trying to find out. I took the pages and stood. I want every email, call note, and inquiry, anything mentioning me, my division, my accounts, or a transition. Marta gave me a long look. If we open this fully, it stops being private family fallout. It stopped being that the minute my mother said executive transition on company property. She gave a single nod. Fair. When I finally went back upstairs, I closed the door to my office and stood there for a moment without moving. My office faced west. On clear days, the river looked like wrinkled tin. There was a fiddle-leaf fig in the corner my assistant kept alive despite my neglect. On the credenza sat a framed photo from our first full team off-site. July 4th, rooftop barbecue. Plastic cups, sunburned faces, skyline behind us. Me in the center laughing with my head tipped back because that was the week we pulled North River away from a competitor by rebuilding a recovery model in 48 hours. Nolan was not in any part of that picture. Neither were my parents. I set the papers down and looked at my nameplate. Avery Wren, Executive Vice President, Strategic Recovery. I had earned every polished letter of it, not through family, through crisis, through impossible deadlines, through the kind of competence people only praise after it saves them money. An hour later, the first text from Mom came in. You embarrassed us. Then another. You could have handled this privately. Then Dad. Well, call me before you make this worse. Then Nolan. You're panicking because you know it's time. I turned the phone face down. A knock. My assistant Lena stepped in carrying a stack of notes and that careful expression people wear when they are trying not to let you know they saw your family attempt to auction off your career. Lena was 27, terrifyingly efficient, impossible to fluster, and better at reading a room than most executives I knew. I rescheduled your 2 o'clock, she said. Also, reception forwarded this. She handed me a visitor log printout. My parents had been in the building 3 times over the last 2 weeks. 3. The first visit was signed under family meeting, the second under private advisory, today under leadership transition. My throat tightened, not panic, fury, sharpened, useful. Who approved the earlier visits? I asked. Lena checked the page. The first one lists Nolan as host. I looked up so fast she almost leaned back. Nolan doesn't work here. I know. Then how did he host visitors? He either used someone's temporary credentials or met them downstairs. There it was again. A door had opened somewhere it should not have. "Lena," I said, "quietly pull every calendar invite, visitor log, and room reservation from the last 30 days with my parents' names, Nolan's name, or generic terms like advisory or transition." Her expression sharpened instantly. "How quiet." "Buried under normal work quiet." She nodded once. "Done." Then she hesitated. "For what it's worth, the team knows this isn't about you." I almost smiled. "It is about me," I said. Yeah, that's the problem. That night, I did not go to my parents' house, even though Mom left 2 voicemails implying I owed them an apology before Sunday dinner. I did not answer Nolan when he sent a selfie from some steakhouse bar with the caption, "Big week ahead." I went home. Tribeca. 12th floor, brick wall. Warm pendant lights over the kitchen island. A place I paid for myself. Outside, rain slicked the street silver. A siren wailed somewhere downtown. My neighbor in 14B was playing old jazz too loud again, trumpet muffled through brick. There was a takeout bag from the deli on the counter, and an unopened envelope from building management about rooftop access rules I had forgotten to read. I ate cold fries and opened my laptop. Then I dug. First emails, then archived invites, then vendor notes. Then forwarded internal messages. By 11:30, the pattern had started to show. Nolan had been using my name casually in outside conversations for months. Not aggressively at first. Carefully, like a parasite learning not to wake the host. Avery asked me to loop in. Avery wants me familiar with the account. Avery said this would likely become a shared family transition long term. My jaw locked so hard I had to make myself unclench it. There were also 2 external replies congratulating him on joining the strategic side soon. One from a lender, one from a software vendor. He answered both without correcting anything. At 12:14 a.m., I found the email that changed everything. Buried in a forwarded chain from one of our junior finance managers, Cam. Subject line, signature routing. Yet Cam had accidentally sent something to Nolan, apparently believing he was involved in some executive process approved above him. Nolan's reply asked whether legacy approvals tied to the Hale family succession plan could be redirected pending internal announcement. I sat up straighter. The Hale family succession plan. Robert Hale had no son in the company. His only child lived in Seattle and wanted absolutely nothing to do with finance. He never used family language around succession. He used competence language, continuity, margins, risk, institutional memory. So one of 2 things had happened. Either Nolan had invented an entire fantasy structure out of thin air, or someone had fed him real language from conversations he should never have heard. At 1 in the morning, I poured seltzer into a wine glass because I wanted the ritual of something stronger without the blur. The city striped my kitchen floor with light. My laptop ran hot under my wrist, and for the first time all day, the thought came clean. This was not favoritism anymore. This was fraud adjacent, corporate misrepresentation, unauthorized access, possibly worse. My mother could tell cousins in Florida that I was difficult, cold, too career-obsessed, impossible to marry, and all the other soft little lies women like her used to punish daughters who stopped being decorative. She could tell church friends in New Jersey that Nolan just needed support and I had grown hard. That was family theater. Cruel, small, familiar. But once they started sending fake authority into contracts, legal, and board correspondence. Yeah, this had moved into a world where records mattered. At 2:03 a.m., my phone buzzed. Not family, Robert Hale. Call me in the morning. No punctuation, no greeting, which in Robert's language meant this was serious. Robert was 72, dry, iron-spined, and patient with almost nobody. He had built Hale Mercer Capital out of a dying regional advisory firm after 2008 by specializing in distressed recoveries nobody else wanted to touch. He trusted very few people. He trusted me more than he ever said out loud. I slept maybe 3 hours. At 8:30 the next morning, I was sitting in Robert's office with a legal pad on my lap and exhaustion pressing at the base of my skull. His office smelled like cedar and old paper. He still kept printed annual reports on his shelves like the internet was a temporary inconvenience. And he studied me over steepled fingers. I had a strange call yesterday. From my father? From a man who introduced himself as a concerned parent trying to stabilize internal succession. I closed my eyes once, briefly. Robert continued. He implied your role had become emotionally compromised. He suggested his son had been informally prepared to assume your responsibilities if needed. Every sentence made me colder. And what, I asked, did you say? Robert leaned back. I asked him whether he was confusing us with medieval England. I laughed. Actually laughed. Then the laugh broke apart because it was funny and humiliating and enraging all at once. Robert slid a sealed envelope across the desk, heavy paper, my name on the front in his handwriting. My stomach tightened again. Ma, what is that? Something I did not expect to give you this week. I looked up. Open it. Inside was a copy of a signed memorandum dated 8 months earlier and attached to a longer instrument held with outside counsel. It named me as designated successor for strategic recovery in the event of Robert's retirement, incapacity, or sale. Confidentially. Along with protected equity vesting tied to performance milestones in my division. I read it once. Then again, my fingers went numb. You never told me. I intended to after your annual review. This is dated 8 months ago. You were in the middle of saving Phoenix, integrating North River, and carrying half this building on your back. I did not need you distracted by politics before the structure was ready. I looked up slowly. So my parents are trying to transition me out of the exact division I'm privately named to succeed. Yes. I sat there with the pages in my hands and felt the shape of the week change. Not because the paper rescued me. I had rescued myself over and over in ways no document could fully hold, but because suddenly, the confidence made sense. The language, succession, approval rights, protected authority. They had gotten close enough to something real to misunderstand it. Robert watched my face. Who has seen this? Not me until 30 seconds ago. Outside counsel, Marta, one board subcommittee. That is all. Then how does Nolan know to ask about approval rights tied to succession? Robert's mouth flattened. That is the correct question. By noon, Marta had pulled in IT. Security began tracing restricted folder access tied to executive planning materials. Denise compiled visitor overlaps. Lena assembled room bookings and calendar pulls. By late afternoon, one name kept surfacing. Bryce Danner, Vice President of Internal Finance. Perfect ties, expensive watch, a habit of speaking softly while starting fires somewhere else. Bryce had been angling for more leverage over strategic recovery budgets since January. I had blocked him twice when he tried to bury my team's client retention metrics inside blended reporting that made his cost-cutting look smarter than it was. He smiled every time I told him no. That kind of smile always makes my skin crawl. Marta met me again around 4. We have preliminary access logs. I stayed standing. A file related to succession planning was opened from Bryce's credentials 9 days ago, after hours. And? The next morning, Nolan visited the building. My mouth went dry. Bryce had not just humored my family. He had fed them, armed them. Why? I asked. Marta didn't soften it. Best early guess? He thought destabilizing you would give him leverage ahead of restructuring discussions. Involving my family? Some people don't care where the gasoline comes from. For a moment, I just stared out through the glass panel beside her office. Ferries cutting white lines across the river, tiny cabs moving below. A whole city continuing as if my life had not just turned into evidence. Then the rage settled into something colder. Not loud, not dramatic, precise. And the next 3 days taught me how betrayal multiplies once you stop looking away. IT traced forwarded snippets from Bryce's account to a personal email. That personal email had been used to send my father a calendar screenshot showing an executive review date. Nolan sent messages to external vendors, implying he had authority to pre-negotiate account transitions. My mother contacted an old family friend at a regional business journal and hinted there might soon be a next-generation leadership story about a son stepping in after a daughter burned out. Burned out. I had worked 46 days without a full weekend during Phoenix. Burnout was not the reason anything almost failed. Understaffing was. Institutional cowardice was. And men like Bryce assuming problems would somehow solve themselves, while women like me bled quietly into the carpet until the numbers turned green again. At home, I started moving through my apartment like I was watching a documentary of my own life. The lease in the kitchen drawer, the Walmart receipt in my tote from batteries and paper towels, the DMV renewal postcard on the counter, the leftovers I kept forgetting to eat, the soft mechanical click of the dishwasher starting at midnight while I built a case against my own blood at the table. Family can ruin your appetite without touching your plate. That Friday, my mother called from a private number. I answered because sometimes I like to hear the exact shape of a lie when it still thinks it has power. Avery, she said, breathy with insulted dignity. Oh, this has gone far enough. I leaned against my sink and watched rain start over the city. Interesting. I thought that in the conference room. You have turned everyone against us. No, I said. Documentation did that. She ignored me. Nolan is devastated. Nolan should try being qualified. It builds resilience. Avery. No, Mom, you do not get to say my name like I'm 16 and forgot to thaw something for dinner. Her voice sharpened. You think this company cares about you. You think these people are your family now. When they are done using you, what will you have? I looked at my own reflection in the glass above the sink. Myself, I said. She scoffed. You sound cold. No, I answered. I sound expensive. That one cut. I heard it land, then the line went dead. Say 2 days later, I drove out to my parents' house in Westchester because Dad texted, "Come get your old tax folders." He knew I needed legacy paperwork for a refinance issue tied to a small condo I rented out in Queens. He had baited the hook with administrative inconvenience, classic parent move. The house looked the same, colonial brick, black shutters, spring tulips outside like the people inside had never done anything ugly in their lives. The entryway still smelled like lemon oil and control. Mom was in the kitchen, Dad was in the den. Nolan's truck was in the driveway. Of course it was. I should have turned around then. I didn't. Dad handed me a banker's box without standing. You made a mess. I set it on the coffee table. You walked into my office with a replacement son. He is not a replacement. Ma, he is your brother. In your religion, maybe. Nolan came in from the kitchen, carrying a protein shake, like he had wandered into the conversation by accident. His smile was lazy. Still doing the martyr thing? I looked right at him. Still pretending a suit makes you employable? Mom stepped between us the way she used to when he stole something, and I noticed first. This family is under enough pressure. I laughed once. The pressure seems very targeted. Dad stood. You are going to stop digging. I looked at all three of them, and suddenly I was 12 again in that same den while Nolan blamed me for a lamp he knocked over, and my parents decided the efficient solution was to punish us both. Except I still had to apologize because I was older by 13 months, and therefore somehow responsible for the moral atmosphere of the house. I had spent my whole youth paying fines on damage I didn't cause. No, I said quietly. I'm done paying for him. Nolan rolled his eyes. You make everything dramatic. Everything gets dramatic when facts show up. He stepped closer. You think you're special because Hale likes you. I did not move, but inside something clicked. Hale likes you. Not respects, not trusts. Likes. That was not Robert language. That was Bryce language. That was power reduced to favoritism because insecure men cannot imagine merit existing without some hidden cheat code. How do you know what Robert Hale thinks? I asked. Nolan smirked. There it was. Now, that tiny fatal expression people get when they think they are only halfway confessing. Dad cut in too fast. He doesn't. I kept my eyes on Nolan. Who told you to say that? Maybe people talk. People like Bryce? His face changed. Barely. Enough. Mom jumped in. Don't drag strangers into this. Too late. I picked up the banker's box and walked out. Mom followed me to the porch, calling my name like I was being unreasonable. The air smelled wet and green. Somebody down the block was mowing their lawn. I put the box in my trunk, got in the car, and drove straight, not home, but downtown. Because now I knew exactly what I wanted. If my parents had been selling family-based authority, I wanted every legal thread they might be using to make that sound plausible. The county clerk's office had bad fluorescent lights, long lines, and the particular exhaustion of a place full of people whose past paperwork had reached forward and bitten them. I waited behind a man, arguing about a deed, and a woman holding 3 folders, labeled probate. A baby cried near the vending machine. I requested archived filings tied to an old advisory, LLC, my father used to talk about, like it had once been bigger than it actually was. I also pulled public records tied to a few old family advisory structures he loved name-dropping whenever he wanted to sound adjacent to money. What came back was better than I expected. Not about Robert, about Dad. 4 years earlier, his advisory LLC had been dissolved under pressure after repeated informal mischaracterizations of relationship status during investor outreach. He had done this before. Not to my company, but in pattern. And inflate proximity, borrow authority, sell access as if it were ownership. I stood under those awful courthouse lights with the stamped copy in my hand and felt certainty settle where anger had been. This was not parental confusion. This was strategy. Dirty, practiced strategy. That Monday, I brought everything to Marta. The LLC dissolution, the misrepresentation language, the visitor logs, Nolan's emails, Bryce's access trail, my father's message to Ethan, the text messages, even screenshots. Marta turned the pages with the grim calm of a surgeon. This is enough to justify a formal internal review, she said. It's enough to justify a flamethrower. She almost smiled. We use paper, not fire. Fine, paper it was. The review moved quickly because Robert pushed it. Bryce was quietly suspended from systems access pending investigation. Nolan's building credentials, whatever improvised version of them he had been using, were cut off. Security issued a note that any visitor connected to me now required direct written authorization. Denise looped in outside counsel. A board subcommittee called a closed-door session for Thursday morning. My parents, of course, interpreted my temporary silence as weakness. Mom texted 2 aunts and a cousin that I was having difficulty accepting a family adjustment. One aunt called me to say, "Sweetheart, maybe this is God redirecting you." I thanked her for her concern and hung up before I said something unforgettable. Nolan posted a photo from a tailor with the caption, "New chapter loading." I took a screenshot, then I said nothing. Silence is useful when other people mistake it for surrender. By Wednesday night, they had convinced themselves they were winning. Dad emailed asking what time he and Nolan should arrive for the leadership handoff discussion. He copied an address routed to the board entrance. Bryce, from a private number by then, sent Marta one final careful message suggesting there may be interpersonal sensitivity surrounding Mr. Wren's familial expectations. Like he had not personally inflated those expectations and handed them a weapon. Marta forwarded it to me without comment. I replied with one line. He writes like a man already pricing his own exit package. Thursday came cold and bright. That sharp Manhattan light that bounces off glass so hard it looks judgmental. I wore charcoal instead of black. Charcoal. A black would have made it look ceremonial. Charcoal looked like work. Lena handed me the agenda packet outside the boardroom and squeezed my forearm once. You good? No, I said. But I'm prepared. That's usually better. She was right. The boardroom sat on the top floor. Long walnut table, screens on the walls, a skyline that made people sit straighter, even when they pretended it didn't. Robert at the head. Marta beside outside counsel. Denise near the end. 2 board members in person, one on screen from Chicago. I was already seated when my parents walked in with Nolan. Mom in navy silk like this was church. Dad with that rigid jaw men get when they still believe conviction can substitute for authority. Nolan carrying a leather folio he absolutely did not need. His eyes flicked to me, mine stayed on his. Has no smile either way. Dad opened with false confidence. Thank you all for making time to resolve this. Robert looked at him like he was lint on a good suit. This meeting was not convened for your comfort. Mom's face faltered for the first time. Good. Outside counsel began. Calm voice, neutral tone, the kind that makes panic look childish. We are here because multiple unauthorized representations were made concerning executive authority, succession, account control, and stakeholder status within Hale Mercer Capital. Dad leaned forward. There has been a misunderstanding. Marta said, there has been documentation. Then the first email went up on the screen. My father's message to Ethan Cole. Orderly transition from daughter to son. Collaborative family strategy. All of his polished nonsense suddenly too visible. Too naked. He tried to interrupt. Counsel kept going. Then Nolan's vendor messages. Incoming transition liaison. Shared family transition. Pre-negotiation language. Then the contracts inquiry about approval rights tied to succession. Then visitor logs. Then building entries. Then Bryce's access file. Then the forwarded materials. You could feel the room changing around them. Not with drama, with gravity. The way decent people recalibrate once facts stop being hypothetical. Dad's face reddened. Mom's hand tightened around her purse strap. Nolan stopped performing calm. Outside counsel turned to my father. Mr. Wren, what authority did you believe you had to make these claims? He answered too fast. Verbal assurance. From whom? He hesitated. From conversations indicating family continuity was understood. Robert spoke for the first time since the meeting opened. I have never given you assurance of any kind. Dad swallowed. Mom jumped in. Our daughter has been poisoning this situation. Nolan was led to believe. I cut across her. Led by whom? She turned toward me. By the impression this company created. No, I said. By the impression you needed. Nolan finally spoke. You always do this. You make everything sound technical so people forget basic loyalty. I looked at him. Basic loyalty is not forged access. He scoffed. I was trying to help. With what? He opened his mouth, closed it. I leaned forward just slightly. Say the job out loud, Nolan. Tell the board what strategic recovery actually does. Without using any words you heard from Bryce. He stared at me, then at Robert, then back at me. Nothing. Not one clean sentence, because he did not know. He knew prestige. He knew hallway language. He knew what a title sounded like at dinner when our parents said it with envy. But he did not know the work. He did not know what I had built. So I said it for him. Strategic recovery oversees distressed portfolio rehabilitation, client retention stabilization after operational failure, risk containment on volatile accounts, and emergency integration architecture during post-acquisition disruption. I built the Phoenix Retention Protocol. I led North River restructuring. I renegotiated the Camden Cascade after Bryce's budget compression nearly cost us 3 anchor clients. I let it sit. Then I turned to the board. Ma, these are the milestones attached to my division. These are the contracts relying on my certified authority. These are the clients I retained personally. And these, I said, sliding the next set of papers forward, are the performance clauses tying protected equity vesting to my continued leadership under the confidential succession structure Mr. Hale executed last year. Mom actually blinked. Dad went still. Nolan looked confused in the way people look when they suddenly realize they've been standing outside a vault they thought was a closet. Council passed around copies, the memorandum, the equity schedule, the successor designation. I watched my father read the first page and understand, too late, that he had not been trying to replace an employee. He had been trying to pry open something far above him with a son who couldn't even define the door. Mom's voice went thin. "What is this?" Robert answered. "This is the part of the company your family was never entitled to touch." Dad looked at me with something rawer than anger, miscalculation. "You knew?" "No," I said. "Not until last week." Nolan's face went flat and ugly. "So that's why. He picked you." I met his eyes. "He picked competence." That line landed like a blade, not because it was cruel, because it was exact. Mom tried one last angle. "Avery, sweetheart, you are letting these people come between you and your family." I almost laughed. I said, "You came to my office to give away my career in front of my staff." She shook her head like this hurt her more. "Yeah, we were trying to secure your future too." "No," I said. "You were trying to secure his using mine." Counsel continued. Bryce's conduct was outlined. His access suspension, the pending separation process. Nolan was instructed to cease contact with all company employees, vendors, and clients. Dad was informed that any future representation of stakeholder or succession authority would trigger formal legal action. Then Marta placed the county clerk filing on the table. We also reviewed prior public records concerning a dissolved advisory entity connected to Mr. Wren and found a previous pattern of mischaracterized affiliation claims. Dad's face changed again. A private embarrassment dragged into institutional light. "That has nothing to do with this," he snapped. Marta answered without raising her voice. It has everything to do with credibility. There is a kind of punishment that does not need shouting. It arrives the moment a man used to being deferred to realizes nobody in the room needs anything from him. The moment his old tricks stop reading as force and start reading as liability. That was the moment my father finally had. Nolan stood abruptly. "This is insane." Robert didn't even flinch. "Sit down or leave." He stayed standing. "She poisoned all of you against us." I said, "You walked in poisoned." He turned on me, bitterness fully visible now. "You loved this. You loved making me look stupid." "No," I said quietly. "You did that yourself. I just stopped covering the mirrors." He went pale. Claire Morrow, one of the board members, folded her hands and looked directly at me. "Ms. Wren, do you wish to continue leading strategic recovery under the current structure?" The room shifted. That was the real question, not whether I could, whether I wanted to, after all of it. The conference room, the forged confidence, the emails, the family mythology, the long nights at my kitchen island with city light on the floor and evidence spread in neat stacks, the county clerk's fluorescent lights, the stamped pages, my mother saying it's what's best for the family in a room built by my labor. I thought about the Thanksgiving tables, the Christmases, the years of being told I was intimidating whenever I stopped shrinking, the way my father used confusion like a weapon, the way Nolan used helplessness like bait. Then I thought about Phoenix, North River, Lena, Denise, the rooftop team photo. They said the division nobody wanted until I made it valuable, and I said, yes, but on clarified terms. Claire nodded. Name them. So I did. Formal internal notice, reinforcing my authority over strategic recovery. Immediate separation of Bryce. Written vendor guidance correcting all unauthorized transition claims. Security restrictions maintained. a documented firewall against external interference. My successor designation remaining confidential unless and until Robert chose otherwise, but with my equity protections accelerated given the attempt to destabilize the division. Counsel took notes. Robert said, "Approved," just like that. No hesitation, no drama. Dad stared at me like I was someone he had never actually met. Maybe I was. My mother's face didn't crumple into tears. It did something worse. It showed recognition. That the dawning horror of a woman realizing her usual tools had no power in a room built for evidence instead of emotion. "Avery," she whispered, "you would do this to us?" I looked at her across the polished table. "You did this to yourselves." Nobody saved them from that sentence. The meeting ended without handshakes. Security escorted Nolan downstairs. Dad refused an escort and then took it anyway after trying to argue with a man younger than his shoes. Mom paused at the doorway and turned back like she expected a private reconciliation scene to rise up and rescue her from public consequence. It didn't. After they left, I stayed in my chair for a moment and stared at the skyline. My hands were steady now. Robert said quietly, "You handled that well." "That is one phrase for it." He almost smiled. "Yeah, another is expensive." I looked at him and laughed. A real laugh this time. Marta closed her folder. "For the record, your brother's face when you asked him to define strategic recovery was almost worth the billable hours." "That," I said, "actually helps." The next week was fallout. Bryce resigned before termination paperwork fully landed, which was exactly the kind of cowardice I would have predicted. The business journal my mother had tried to prime never got its next-generation leadership story, though a much smaller item appeared later about governance tightening at a private firm after an internal compliance review. No names, no scandal, just the bland public version of a private fire. Vendors received formal correction notices. One of them called me directly to apologize for entertaining Nolan's messages at all. I thanked him and moved on. I did not have energy left for ceremonial forgiveness. Extended family split exactly the way extended family always does when truth arrives late and inconvenient. A few went quiet because silence is easier than admitting they enjoyed believing the worst about the capable daughter. A few called me cruel. One cousin texted, "I always thought something was off with how they treated you," which was kind and useless. Mom sent me 9 messages in 2 days. Family should not destroy family. We were trying to protect everyone. You are misreading intentions. You have always been hard to reach. Nolan is humiliated. Call your father. I answered once. Humiliation is not the same as accountability. After that, nothing. At work, things changed in ways both subtle and total. My people did not speak to me with more fear. They spoke to me with cleaner respect. Denise became openly warmer. Claire pulled me into strategy sessions she used to reserve for people older and louder. Lena brought in celebratory muffins one morning and claimed they were leftovers from a vendor meeting, which was such an obvious lie it almost made me emotional. One evening, as the office emptied and the sky turned violet behind the buildings, I stood alone in my office, looking at the glass door where my name was etched, Avery Wren. For years I had wanted my family to say it with pride, not because I needed applause, because every child, even a grown one with her own lease and her own accountant and her own life, still wants for one humiliating second to be recognized by the people who first taught her what love was supposed to sound like. But there is a difference between being seen and being claimed. My parents never really wanted to see me. They wanted to use me without respecting me. They wanted my success as a family asset and my obedience as the cost. What they could not survive was the fact that I learned to keep one without offering the other. A month later, I changed my emergency contact. It sounds small. It felt enormous. I replaced my mother's number with Lena's for work records and with my friend Marisol's for personal forms. At my building, I removed my parents' access authorization from the front desk notes. At my rental property, I changed the mailing contact. Shut at my bank, I reviewed every beneficiary line and stared at the screen for a long time before choosing a local arts scholarship fund as the contingent entry until I decided what came next. Paper can feel holy when it breaks an old pattern. Summer arrived. The city got loud again. Sidewalk heat, tourists stopping exactly where nobody should stop, bad loafers, roof decks. Hale Mercer posted its strongest second quarter in 3 years, and strategic recovery led internal rankings by every metric Bryce had once tried to blur. Robert never named me successor publicly. He did something better. He expanded my authority on paper and in practice. No ambiguity, no soft wording, no room for family mythology. That July 4th, my parents hosted a backyard barbecue in Westchester. I found out through an aunt who sounded startled when I told her I had other plans. I spent that night on a Brooklyn rooftop with coworkers and real friends, watching fireworks smear red and gold across the river while somebody burned hot dogs, and Lena argued with Marisol about whether people were born efficient or became that way through trauma. I laughed so hard I had to sit down. Around 10, my phone buzzed. A photo from Mom. The old backyard. The grill. Nolan in some ridiculous flag shirt smiling too hard. No caption. Just proof I hadn't come. I looked at it for a second. Then I deleted it. Sometimes healing is not a speech. Sometimes it is a thumb moving one bright little thing into the trash. By August, the last legal edges were tied off. But Council sent a final memo confirming cease and desist language had been issued to Dad regarding any future representation of affiliation with the firm. Nolan, according to a cousin, had started consulting for a friend's startup, which in family translation usually meant talking too much in borrowed conference rooms. Mom was still telling people she prayed for me daily. I hoped she did. She needed the practice of speaking to someone who might not automatically agree. Dad left one voicemail late on a Tuesday. His voice sounded older. I don't understand why you couldn't have handled this inside the family. I listened to it once while standing barefoot in my kitchen with grocery bags on the counter and a carton of eggs warming in my hand. Then I said to the empty apartment, I did, and I meant it. That the family I saved was the one I built after surviving the first one. I never sent him that line. Some truths are wasted on the people who earned them least. In September, I took a solo weekend upstate. Small inn, wooden porch, air that smelled like rain and leaves instead of steel and traffic. I brought one novel. Didn't finish it. Walked more than I talked. On Saturday morning, I sat with coffee in a chipped ceramic mug and realized I had not checked whether my mother had texted in almost 40 hours. Freedom does not always arrive with music. Sometimes it feels like your nervous system forgetting to brace. When I got back to the office, there was a small package on my desk. No return address. Inside was the silver pen Dad gave me when I graduated business school. The card was blank. I held the pen for a long time. Then I put it in the bottom drawer and closed it. Not everything that comes back deserves resurrection. By December, the year-end review came under white holiday lights wrapped around the lobby rails. Someone had put peppermint bark near reception. The tree in the atrium looked expensive in that understated corporate way. From my office, the city glowed with early winter darkness and windows full of other people's lives. Claire stopped by after the meeting. You look different, she said. Older, lighter. I smiled. That too. She stood beside me for a moment, looking out at the skyline. You know what impressed me most? The mountain of documentation? That was excellent, she said. Then she looked at me. No, it was that you didn't beg them to love you in the room. That hit somewhere quiet and deep. Why, because she was right. For most of my life, even at my strongest, some part of me had still been performing for a verdict I wanted changed. If I explained better, worked harder, stayed calmer, succeeded bigger. Maybe the story would shift. Maybe my parents would finally say, Avery is enough all by herself. Maybe Nolan would stop reaching into my life and calling it sharing. But in that boardroom, with every page laid out and every lie pinned to its timestamp, I did not ask for tenderness. I did not negotiate for fairness from people who had spent decades proving they preferred hierarchy. I did not translate my pain into something easier for them to digest. I just let the truth stand there and do what truth does when it is finally documented. It does not beg, it remains. By Christmas, I had plans elsewhere. Marisol's apartment, 20 people, too much food, a crooked little artificial tree in the corner, cheap ornaments, real affection. Somebody brought store-bought cookies and claimed they were homemade so the hostess wouldn't feel bad. We all knew. We all loved her anyway. At midnight, walking back to my car with cold air cutting at my cheeks, I checked my phone and found one message from Mom. There is still a seat for you. I looked at the words for a long time. Then I typed the only answer I had left. I have my own table now. She did not respond. Maybe she cried. Maybe she called me ungrateful. Maybe she sat in that polished Westchester house under expensive lights and finally met the quiet consequence of having loved a daughter only as long as that daughter stayed useful. I don't know. I do know this. Said the job they tried to hand to my brother was never the real prize. Not the office, not the title, not the skyline, not the equity, not even the respect I fought for and finally got. The prize was the moment I stopped allowing their version of me into rooms I had built with my own hands. Late one evening in January, almost a year after Phoenix and months after the boardroom, I stayed late finishing notes on a restructuring brief. The floor had mostly emptied, printers silent, elevators chiming somewhere far away. My office lights cast a clean glow across the desk. On the glass door, my name caught the reflection of the city. I stood, gathered my papers, reached for the handle, and for 1 second, my hand rested there while I thought about the girl I used to be in that house in Westchester. The one who got blamed faster than she got believed. The one who learned to overperform because ordinary effort was never going to protect her. The one who mistook endurance for love. I wanted to tell her something simple. You were never hard to love. They were just more committed to loving power. Then I opened the door, stepped into the hallway, and pulled it shut behind me. The soft click echoed down the glass corridor. This time, it sounded like mine.